do the same. Ladies and gentlemen, Florida Family Voice President and CEO, Erik Dellenback.
Well, if you know me, I have control issues, and I know every piece of this script except that bio, which I will know next year before it happens. Jeff, that was super kind. There's two things I would ask you to take away from that bio. One is that I genuinely believe that there wasn't one time that I ever stepped into a role that I was qualified for. I believe that God loves unqualified people who are either crazy or bold or stupid, some combination of the three, and he loves if you'll just give him a little bit of obedience. The second thing that I thought about as Jeff was reading that, and I've said this a lot, kind of the anthem of my life has become, there's moments in life that you see things you can't unsee. Something that you encounter and you kind of know in the moment it's going to change the trajectory of your life. And that is the story of my career, is just one where I just kept seeing things that I felt like God was saying, this is now your problem. And so we sit here tonight with a big task in front of us. But before I jump in deeply, what you guys don't know is that every person that we're honoring tonight, every person that's standing on this stage, is a dear friend of mine. This is a very special night for me. This is a night where my goal is to get through a night unemotional, if I could, and yet honor people who are worthy of honor. Let you meet some people who are changing the game around the country, and just allow you to hear what's happening in our state. I'm so thankful for our board. I made this comment last year. Bruce and the other 4 members of the board outside of me represent 200 years of marriage. I think that's a big deal when you're running an institution that's focused on life, marriage, family, and religious liberty, and just is an impressive group of men that have poured into this organization for so long with incredible spouses. I got so many sponsors in the room. Was a list to me last year. So some of you know last year, since half the room is new, right? Half of you have never been to this thing. I stood here last year, and I was the MC because that's what they asked me to do when I was working in the governor's office. But in the meantime, I had taken the role of being president and CEO. So it was like that old hair club commercial. I'm like, I'm the MC and the president. It was kind of a weird transitional moment. And what last year was a list of sponsors, I'm not exaggerating, has this year become a list of people that I very much value as friends. And we have some amazing people that have supported this work. I think the thing that I learned over the past year, I'm not quite at a year, 2 things. One, many of you know that this stage last year in a different ballroom, but less than a year ago, was Charlie. And he spoke here, and then we had a Q&A there. And for many of you, the last thing you saw on this stage was Charlie walking off of it. In what seemed like another night with another great speaker inspiring another crowd and another moment that we would remember, but never believing it would be as monumental as it was and as big as it was for each of us. I have to say, and I don't have a long statement on this, but 2 days ago we lost another faith hero, Bob Tebow, Mr. Tebow as I knew him. Tim's father, and if any of you know anything about the fight for life, you would know that the story of Bob Tebow, Tim gets the credit, Bob did the work. Bob was a stalwart in the life movement and went home to be with Jesus 2 days ago, and I just want to publicly acknowledge the ministry of those 2 amazing men as we stand here tonight with their absence. Let me tell you what, though, those 2 are doing amazing right now while we're still here fighting these fights. Something I've learned over the last year is that this organization, and things that you may not know, has for 20 years had win after win after win. And each of you, if I put a microphone around, might name some of those wins, but there's 2 I want to point out to you really briefly. Do you know, this is like a little did you know section. Did you know that there was a movement run by Florida Family Voice long before I got there to mobilize the vote in the Panhandle after the hurricane hit it in 2018? And they can directly track, yeah, that's a big deal. What's crazy is what you may not know is that they can directly track the amount of votes that came out of that panhandle to getting Rick Scott elected and Governor Ron DeSantis elected. Can I tell you what would the last 8 years have been like if that little movement didn't happen? I won't even name the other candidate. We're so grateful that little things like that, mighty, mighty works, have been done for 20 years. And so I stand here humble on the shoulders of a bunch of people who have spent 20 years fighting in our state. The other thing I learned over the last year is that even some of our staunchest supporters didn't understand the scope of what we did. And so I want to just take a minute tonight and talk about the state of the walls. It's important for you to know there's 4 walls we stand on: life, marriage, family, and religious liberty. If you forget most things tonight, remember those 4. In fact, I would tell you another thing that you should know is we are a nonpartisan, biblical worldview standing under the authority of this book organization. So our allegiance doesn't start with red or blue. It starts right here. Now, having said that, for 20 years, we have been Florida's premier defender of life, marriage, family, and religious liberty. And we'll continue for many more to come with your help. I want to tell you that for 20 years, what mattered most was our influence in the legislature. Many of you know that. You saw so many awesome public servants stand a minute ago. Our influence in the legislature affected the bills that affected you and the 23 million Floridians. But guys, a couple years ago, the battle changed with Amendments 3 and Amendment 4. Y'all remember those numbers? What changed in that moment was an initiative hit our ballot, and all of a sudden, instead of having 160 people that we wanted to come alongside and pour into and educate, now all of a sudden, a few million people were going to head to a voter box, and they were going to read down a page, and they were going to come to something that was meant to deceive them. And so our education had to be, how do we start talking to millions of people instead of just the 160 that have so helpfully governed our lives in Florida? The game changed. The match changed. And so what was influence 160 people became, how do you change a state? Someone said to me, you can't win Florida politics without winning Florida pews. That stuck with me. That stuck with me. And I told you guys last year, for those of you who are here, that what you would see from our organization is a shift of our bullseye. It doesn't mean that we're leaving the legislature. It doesn't mean that we don't love the legislature and we're not going to pour into the legislature. It means that our bullseye is now to make much of the church, to do everything we can to stand under and behind and lift the church. So I want to name the 4 things that we do and how we do them. Number 1, and I think these are going to be up there if I can. Number 1 is we make much of the church by emboldening and equipping them. Friends, can I tell you there's 17,000 Christian churches? If you've ever heard me speak, you've heard that phrase, 17,000 Christian churches. 70% of Florida says they're Christian. Does that make your mind spin? That 70% of our state, which means we are the largest people group in the state, and if we didn't talk about red and blue first, there would be no issues in our state that we didn't agree on under the authority of this book. And so there's 17,000 Christian churches, 70%. Do you know, I'll share a fun nationwide stat for you. The least Christian state in the country is 57% Christian. I'm not going to name it in case one of y'all's from there. The most Christian state in the country is Alabama. They're at 89% reported Christian. Do you realize that if those voices ever spoke even remotely as one, it would be the loudest group in every state in our nation? If I have one dream for the state of Florida, that's it. My goal for the state of Florida and Florida Family Voice is to humbly lock arms with every ministry that will lock arms with us and walk forward together to make much of the church, to educate the church, to allow them to step back into their rightful place that God created them to do. You know, God created both government and the church, and the role of the church, the problem is that one voice at a time will not be heard. But together, collectively, that one voice can change everything about everything. Some of you have already asked me, I'll get asked by others tonight, who's going to be the next governor? Can I tell you that that's an interesting question, but I'm far more concerned about a year coming, and I don't think it's that far off, where we don't wait for a governor to come into office to set the culture. The church sets the culture, and the governor steps in just to govern the state. Every time that you feel like your voice has been quiet as a Christian, it's because we've let it. We are the masses. We are the majority. And the truth is, people say to me all the time, I don't understand, how do you get a bunch of denominations to get along? Well, I'll tell you, in the governor's office, which is crazy, by the way, to use government to bring the churches together, but we had 2,200 churches working together, as Jeff referenced. I started something back in the day with Timmy called Night to Shine, and during Night to Shine, we had 39 different denominations working together across 1,000 churches. You know how we were able to get them to unify and have one voice? Because we didn't need them to agree on everything. We need them to agree on a few things that are core principles, and those core principles, and say, when these things come against us, you have my voice to stand. What's that look like? Well, for the really simple purpose I could give you in the room, it looks like the NRA. You know, all the members of the NRA, of which I'm sure there's plenty in here because I saw the pickup trucks pulling into the parking lot. And so all those pickup truck people that are NRA members, you know, if you start talking to other NRA members, this might be a shock to you. You wouldn't agree on a lot. But you agree on a couple things. In that particular case, the right to bear arms. And my comment would be, is the church not better at talking about the one or two things of loving the Lord and serving the most vulnerable than the NRA? And if we can speak in that one voice, guys, our voice will be heard. And so the first thing we do is we're going to make a lot of churches over the next few years. The second thing is we're going to continue to educate and pour into our legislature. We want to do anything we can to lift them up and talk about it. Can I give you a crazy stat and blow your mind? So you guys know, I think this is a civics room, but our legislative session gathers for 9 weeks. They pass most of the bills, discuss most of the bills that are going to affect your life. Do you know that in this legislative session, how many bills were filed heading into the legislative session? I won't make anyone guess. I'll just save it for you and say 1,962. For those of you who are thinking 10, me too. That's what I thought. Not 1,962 bills were put in front of this legislature. We have teams. One of the things we do is we have teams that go study those bills and find out everywhere where they intersect with your biblical worldview. We found 147 bills that either were for or against something that this book talks about, your biblical worldview. 147. And we fought like heck on the ones that were against it, and we promoted like heck the ones that were for it. And I just would tell you, I don't think most people even know that. Our legislative members, our political members in the room know that. But I think the average Floridian has no idea, and I think in that moment, Florida Family Voice has a moment to kind of like, to quote the great Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Jessup, that's a wall that you want us on. I don't expect you to know every biblical worldview law. I don't know every biblical worldview law. That's why we hire experts to do it and be able to fight those bills. And so that's number two. Number three is we're going after the next generation. Friends, I got to tell you, we got to start breaking some lies. We got to start breaking lies. The biggest lie we're going to break is the separation of church and state. It is the most misdefined, most harmful thing that maybe has happened to generations. And you know, now we've got people coming out and talking honestly about it, but it's still this thing. We've got to break the lie of the Johnson Amendment. For those of you in this room that have been told that pastors are muzzled and not allowed to talk about things, first off, we know it's a lie because it's never ever happened. It will never ever happen because if it ever happened, they would give us a precedence. They don't want to give us a precedence, they want to fear. They want fear. And so we've got things that we've got to teach the next generation to say, these easy civic lessons. What is a bill? What is an amendment? The things that matter to them. Something that Charlie put in motion. So we're investing, you will see from Florida Family Voice in the next 12 months, we will launch something called the Christian Education Network. In the same way that I want to bring a voice to the church, we want to bring a voice to the Christian Education Network in this state. Because again, I'm just telling you, I was in the governor's office for quite a while. One voice at a time doesn't move the needle. Even big ones. But collective voices move needles, and so we're going to spend a lot of time pouring into that. And then finally, we want to engage and equip voters. We've got a small election coming in November, a very consequential election. We will send out more than 2 million voter guides. You know what our voter guides are talking about? Biblical worldview issues. Where do they stand? Because we don't want you just to know what party they're from. That's half the thing. But you should know what they stand for. You should know because the parties are becoming so divided. We want to stand in the gap and tell you who these candidates are. Friends, I want to tell you two things I think Christians do wrong. It's a weird part of the speech. Just hang with me. One is that we celebrate too long. So when Roe v. Wade was defeated, we high-fived for about a year. By the time we were done high-fiving, 7 states had taken constitutional amendments that were far worse than Roe v. Wade ever was, and we're watching abortion happen in states because of it. We celebrate too long. And the second thing we do, and this one gets me, and you will see so much focus from us, is that for some reason we do not do well building armies in peacetime. We as a group are collectively reactive. And man, I'm going to tell you, if I could plead with you tonight, I'd say when we get through the end of the night, I want you to know that we are begging you to walk with us proactively, building an army, not just for the battles we face today, but the ones to come. Because you know what really speaks well to the next time someone wants to run an abortion amendment through Florida? When there's 2,000 churches and 1,400 people saying, I'm a watchman on the wall of life. Don't bring that garbage into my state. Just keep that stuff out. You know what else helps? You know what else helps? Is when we're fostering and adopting. And when we have such a culture of caring for kids, why would you ever abort a child? We've got 100 families waiting. Because we've got to, as I talked about last year, and I'll say it over and over, you're going to hear it for years, is we've got to have the sword, we've got to defend the things, but we've got to have the trowel and keep building the walls. You know why we have to build the walls? Someone said to me, I don't remember where I was, I wish I could give them credit. They said, Eric, do you ever think we'll stop fighting? I was like, well, no, because the enemy's real and he's going to keep fighting. But if you're asking me from a military or battle perspective, I'd say the best way to stop fighting is to build walls that you can stand behind. And let's be super clear, I believe with every fabric of my being, and we as an organization believe that the church is those walls. And so as the church rises up into its proper and right place, then we come behind it with our sword and our trowel, and we stand and we serve that thing that then now is the forward-facing wall to a culture that doesn't want us to be around. Friends, I'll say, as I finish, I'll just simply say, I got stuck in the book of Nehemiah. First 6 chapters in Nehemiah. It's the greatest wall building story of all time. Both defense and building. There's 2 things I've pulled from the story of Nehemiah that I want you to hear tonight. One, you know what the role of Nehemiah was and the role that I want you to assume with us at Florida Family Voice? Nehemiah was persistent through those 6 chapters at being everywhere reminding people of who God is and what he's capable of. So everybody that tells me all the reasons we can't do things or why we can't get churches to get along or why we can't do that, yeah, listen. Let me remind you of who God is and what he's capable of. The second thing is that when that happens, then the glory is given to God, which is what we will be aiming for. The state of the walls is this. They're not perfect. They're still in rubble. They're not fully rebuilt. We must continue to stand on the walls with our sword out, but we must continue to do the work of rebuilding as well. The truth is that until the king returns, the walls will stand somewhat folded. But the higher we can raise them, the more we can educate them, the more we can embolden them, the more we can empower them, the reality is that Florida can stand as a beacon of hope, not just for our existence and lifestyle in Florida, but for the entire nation. So my comment to you is celebrate the wins. Keep your eyes on the horizon. Stay to the work of rebuilding the walls, and remember who God says he is and what he says he can do. I'm going to tell you a story about a man who did that well as we transition to a really important time of this night. This is the Gala and Awards dinner. One man who stood well and did these things I speak of in history was William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was one of the most courageous and principled leaders in modern history. As a member of British Parliament, he devoted his life to the fight against the transatlantic slave trade, an institution deeply embedded in the culture and the economy of his time. But Wilberforce was driven by something deeper than politics. He was driven by conviction that came from this book and what he learned in it. His Christian faith shaped not only what he believed, but how he lived, how he led, and what he was willing to stand for. But for more than 20 years, he labored, often in the face of an intense opposition, criticism, and repeated defeat. There were moments when it would have been easier to step back, to soften the message, to move on to something less costly, but he didn't. He remained steady, faithful, committed. I once had a friend tell me that perseverance was a lost art of modern-day Christianity, and eventually that persistence led to the passage of the Slave Trade Act of 1807, one of the most significant moral victories in history, and before his death, he lived to see slavery itself abolished throughout the British Empire. Wilberforce's life reminds us of something we need to remember today. Real change takes time. The conviction must outlast opposition, and that faithfulness in the public square matters. Tonight, we're going to give out the William Wilberforce Award. There's a couple things you need to know about it. We don't give it out lightly. I don't read those paragraphs and give a award out lightly. We don't give it out annually. We give it out when an individual demonstrates that same kind of courage, who's willing to live out their faith with clarity, conviction, consistency, even when it's not easy, even when it costs something. It's reserved for special moments where people push back against a cultural challenge. You want to know what makes tonight special? That award's been given to Jeb Bush. It's been given to James Dobson. It was last year given to Speaker Paul Renner. This year, for the first time in the William Wilberforce award history, it will be given to a pastor. Because the battle has changed, friends. God raises up different warriors and different voices and different people for the different battles that he has. And there's a great bio in your program, but I want to highlight a few things. Tonight we're giving this award, the William Wilberforce honoree, to Pastor Joby Martin of 1122. I'm going to do my best to not be emotional. This part's going to be rough. As the founder and lead pastor of the Church of 1122 in Jacksonville, he has faithfully preached the word and truth of God's word, called people to repentance and transformation, and challenged believers to live out their faith in every area of life. Last year, Charlie Kirk stood on this stage and praised the work of the Church of 1122. In a time when many are tempted to soften the truth and avoid difficult conversations, Pastor Joby has consistently chosen clarity. He's reminded the church that faith is not meant to be hidden, that the gospel is not meant to be diluted, and that following Jesus requires both conviction and courage. And perhaps most importantly, he's modeled what it looks like to lead with both truth and love without compromising either. I'm going to show you a video of why Pastor Joby is receiving this award. I want to set the video up like this. I spent many, many months with my good friend David Dewhurst and our Attorney General James Uthmeyer scouring this state, trying to find every faith leader that we could that would talk about Amendment 4 and what was happening. And I got to tell you, I was turned down a lot. I didn't understand that. I couldn't figure out why a pastor could say that's not our problem, but they did. And Joby, preaching to a congregation that I'm just going to say was about 20,000 people attend 1122 at that time in person. And he said, I'm going to preach it. And he picked a Sunday to preach it. And I'm not making this up. I got word on Thursday, maybe, that Joby was in the hospital, that Thursday. And I'm texting with him, and I said, I feel like this is my fault. And he said, it is. And he knew. We weren't playing, man. We knew. This was like real spiritual warfare making itself in a physical, tangible realm. And so he got up a few weeks later, coughing, voice still hurting, and he preached this message to 20,000 people. I took a 9-minute clip, which I shortened to 5 minutes for you tonight. I sent it to 34,000 faith leaders in Florida. And you know that the days and weeks after, I started getting messages back from their churches, almost verbatim, which, by the way, we were thrilled about. There was nothing. We were trying to be original. We were just trying to be effective, right? That's the words. And so we started getting words back, and we started realizing that courage and boldness begets boldness. And I will tell you, and you got an attorney general that we'll be honoring here in a minute, we know, the pollsters know, the reason that this thing was beat in Florida was because of the church waking up, speaking about it, talking about it. And I'm going to say one more thing before I launch this video. If for those of you in the room who are like, yeah, that's good, but what was the consequence? Well, you should ask him. But I know this. I know that right now, 40,000 people attend weekly, and 100,000 people watch online. They doubled every number they have by preaching out the truth about things like this. As I show this video, I want your mind to go back to where we were in October of 2024. I want you to remember the fight we were in. Some of you have compartmentalized that and pushed past the victory. I want you to remember the lives that were saved because people spoke truth. I think it's pretty clear to know why he's a fitting recipient for the William Wilberforce Award. Pastor Joby, I've said it to you a lot, man, but thank you. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of what you inspired in our state. The fact is we didn't win by a lot. And the fact is that every single thing that every single person did that mattered, and that mattered a lot to the outcome of that. We thank you for your faithfulness, your leadership, your boldness. I'm so proud that you're my pastor on that note. And Pastor Joby, on behalf of the board of directors and the leadership team of Florida Family Voice, we want to honor you tonight with the Florida Family Voice William Wilberforce Award. Ladies and gentlemen, Pastor Joby Martin.